class, Professor Brennan back. Okay, so we are finishing or continuing, not finishing, because we are most likely are going to have another video after this because I'm giving a lot of details. I really want you to get a really good sense of and understand the influence verbal communication has on us. Let's go straight to that. This is for my Com2 class, by the way, interpersonal communication. And we've been talking about verbal communication, communicating with words. We're on part 3 of it right now, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. And we're going to start from this slide. So this is the third. We're looking at different characteristics of verbal communication. So far, we've talked about the rules, we've talked about symbols, and now we're going to look at subjectivity. And what is subjectivity? I like to often think of it as an easy way to think of it as the opposite of objectivity. But subjectivity really means how things, we're the vehicle, we're the filter. Each of us are our own filters for reality. Everything filters through us in our experience. And if by now you've figured out how much your life experience thus far, right, whatever age you are right now, how much your background, your life experiences, your family experiences, your relationship experiences, your culture, your gender, how much all of that has influenced how you see the world. Right? And the more we become aware of it, the more we can choose whether that's working for us or not working for us. Right? So we have this subjectivity. Like, I'm going to give you an example. When I was younger, when I had not really looked at the psychology behind like my family experience, I was terrible at relationships. I was unable to make a commitment. And I still have issues around feeling suffocated or claustrophobic. And I'm sure it was because growing up, I'm an only child. And I had both parents were home and they stayed married, not home, but both parents stayed married. They were never divorced. But I had a grandmother on my mom's side who was verbally abusive. And she was basically kind of my babysitter. She was both my caretaker and the person that was not nice to me. Okay. So right there is an interesting little marriage happening right there in terms of then what kinds of partners I would pick later on in my life when I was pretty unconscious about what I was doing, meaning I hadn't really looked at who I was. So the point is that we are subjective, like everything filters through us and how we see reality. And we don't get to change that until we get to know ourselves better, which takes time. That's really my biggest point about that. So let's move on. I like to give you little tidbits as we move on. I think it will help you understand yourself better, at least I hope. Okay, subjectivity. Interpreting the meaning of words, communication through the lens of one's personal experience, historical narrative, which is just talking about, cultural upbringing, and current lived community. Okay, that's the meaning of what we're talking about, subjectivity. Interpreting the meaning of words or communication through the lens of one's personal experience, historical narrative, cultural upbringing, and current lived community. I'll give you another example. So I had an upbringing from 4th grade on was a very privileged, economically privileged upbringing, of which I will tell you, I did not know how economically privileged I was because the people that I associated with and the friends that I had were all economically privileged. You don't know what you don't know. And it wasn't until I went off to college and moved to a completely different part of the state. I grew up in Southern California. I went to San Francisco State University for my undergraduate education that I realized that maybe my life experience was different from other people's. I really did not, you could say I was ignorant. Now, I wasn't mean-spirited, but I was pretty ignorant. I hadn't had any point of reference. So that goes for everyone's point of reference. If you grew up in a family, in a traditional community, where all you've known in your life are people that are like yourself, that live like you, and then you leave that and go somewhere else, you might be shocked. And there are some ways I was curious. I've always been a curious person, but it was also shocking. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. Okay. So subjectivity is how we interpret things through our own personal experience, our historical narrative. That means our historical story. Where do we come from? Who are we? What's our cultural identity? Or that cultural upbringing that we have? And what our current lived community, our current lived community experiences. Now there's different components. We have the relational component and we call the content component. So the relational component means it's in how you frame the meaning of things through your relationship with others, right? So how you look at your relationship, like the relationship you have had, if your mom's still alive, hopefully chances are most of you have, your parents are still alive, that relationship with that female or whatever, whoever your female caretaker was, if you had one, what that relationship was. That frames your meaning of your experience. Also, maybe how you relate to other women. That's both if you're a man or a woman, right? There's a saying that goes that how a woman feels about his mother is often how he's going to treat his future partner, his future wife. Okay. Now, I don't know how that works in homosexual relationships. Honestly, I don't know that answer. But I do know heterosexual relationships. I know that how a man feels about his mother is often how he's going to treat his future girlfriend or wife, and vice versa. How a woman feels about her father will often be the choices that she'll make around what kind of men. Okay. But I'm going to say that I'm going to give you an example. It could also be someone that's has an authority in your life. So I'm going to go back to my grandmother again. Poor grandma. And by the way, it's been a long time and I've already forgiven her for all this. But as I said, my grandma was both the source of love and comfort because she took care of me. My parents both worked. My mom had a business. My dad had his own business. And they were gone a lot. They were not around, but she was around. But she was also the person that made me feel bad about myself, made me feel like, I think I told you in the beginning when I talked about communication, how I was afraid to talk and I didn't want to share myself. And she had a lot to do with that. And of course it was all her own stuff, but I was a child and I had no other person there was no other point of reference but her. So she was both the source of my comfort and the source of my discomfort. Now, what do you think I would do then in terms of, I told you that I made bad choices in relationships. A lot of the times that I made bad choices in relationships that I had, I would pick someone who was both the source of my comfort and the source of my discomfort. Oftentimes, in fact, men that I chose, and my dad wasn't like this. There were a couple men that I chose that were definitely verbally abusive, on the borderline of physically abusive. Now, my grandmother wasn't physically abusive. Nobody was physically abusive in my house, but there was verbal abuse that happened. So again, I picked people that would make me feel bad about myself, but I didn't feel good about myself in the first place. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been with them, right? But they added to that, but they're also the source of my emotional comfort. So it doesn't have to be genderized. It can be the person who has a lot of influence in your life growing up. So something to think about for you all. Maybe you had a grandparent too, that then you have then sought out future partners that look like that. Not look like, but act like that person. Or your relationship is similar. So the content component is how it situates the meaning, the situation, right? Again, we're going to continue talking about these relationships. So subjectivity, this is in terms of verbal communication, interpreting the meaning of the words of the communication from other people through that lens of our personal experience, our historical narrative, our cultural upbringing, and our current lived community. The two components involved are relational and content, right? Or context. It situates the meaning. So it creates a situation, a context for understanding what something means. Again, based upon our experience. So I'm going to say one more thing. Such an important lecture. When I talked about me feeling suffocated, so because of that experience growing up, I couldn't wait to get out of my house. I couldn't wait till I was sent off to college far enough away that no one was around. It was 8 hours away. No one was going to be able to get to me quickly unless I got on a plane. And I wanted that. I wanted that freedom and I wanted that space. I didn't want anyone getting on me or looking over my shoulder or watching me because that's how I felt at home. Again, content situating meaning. So anytime a relationship would get like uncomfortable for me, it would bring that up and I'd want to get out of that situation. Again, reacting to something from the past. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. We're going to move on. Okay, subjectivity, language, and identity. How we understand our own identity, right? How do we understand, what does that mean? Language shapes what we call ourselves, how we know ourselves. It shapes our name, right? There's a whole story around my name. Barry, the name Barry comes from a dancer named Barry Chase. It shapes our gender. I don't think I ever had any trouble knowing that my gender identify as a female, but I definitely was made fun of because of my name when I was a kid. Definitely. Anything that's different, kids always want to make fun of. It's so funny because when you get older, being different is a good thing. Not being the same is a good thing. Your social role, like how we call ourselves, what we know our social role, or identify as our social role is both as our role in the family. I'm a sister-in-law now, and I've been a sister-in-law before, but I'm a sister-in-law, and I'm a wife, and my parents are passed, so I'm still a daughter, but I'm not really a daughter in the same way. And I have a half brother, so I'm a half sister. Our race or ethnicity, our social role also could be our occupational role. Like I'm a teacher, I'm a mentor. I always try to mentor and help young people. I'm really inspired by young people. So you guys all motivate me to be a better person. Race and ethnicity. As a white human being, I can see I have lots of limits in terms of my understanding, especially in today's world that we live in, and realizing how much my point of view has been limited by my race and how the structure's been set up that way. My occupation, I just talked about that, how we know ourselves, how I see myself as a teacher, and whatever your occupation, if you see yourself as a service person or an occupation that you see yourself in, and what is it about how you know yourself? Those of that you want to go into criminology or be a police officer, how is the language? How do you talk about yourself in that way? Right? How do you, like for me as my occupation as a teacher, I instruct. I'm really good at instructing and I'm really good at like looking at people and deciding how I can make use of them, which is just like an instructor. And it doesn't mean use of them like hurting them. It means, okay, you're good at this, you should go do that. In a situation where I'm in charge, I know exactly like go over here, go over there, go over there, right? I might also be a good planner, a person like that. But that's part of my personality and how I know myself, and my being a teacher in whatever occupation you're going to be in is going to highlight those parts of who you are and how you talk about yourself. Okay, we're stopping here and we're going to move on to the next video. I'll see you soon.